What's up? I just finished reading the Iliad and I'm going to talk about it. This video is just going to be a general look at the Iliad. It's going to have a lot of my personal interpretation of it, but for the first half of the video, I just want to give you the undisputable facts about the book. I've watched a lot of lectures about the Iliad, and it ranges from being an academic look at warfare, um, a look at vice, greed, pride, the cost of glory, immortality. It's a very deep book. The Iliad is the cornerstone of Western civilization. It's the first book that enters the canon of Western civilization and, in a way, is similar to the Bible. So, an important thing about this book to consider is it comes before the Bible. This all this happened before Jesus, before Adam and Eve, the story of and Eve, at least as written in written form. So all of this is pre-Christian stuff, and you can see by reading it, all of these mini stories, these things, very specific things that are happening to very specific people, are lessons and morals. You can see, it shows. It's almost. It gives me the sense that it's almost like it's a Greek Bible. That's what it feels like, without the um, heavy overtones of religious uh, judgment, I guess you could say. It's kind of like, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it really. But let me just continue on from there. The Iliad is a story about a war, the Trojan War. However, the book only captures a very short amount of time. It's only one element of the Trojan War, and it's at the very end. It embodies the conflict between Achilles and Agamemnon, and Achilles and Hector. The book does not end with the fall of Troy, it ends with the death of Hector. And there's so many literary elements of this book that are unique, because the main character, the central theme of the book, is following Achilles. And nothing about Achilles, besides the fact that he is a great warrior and destined for immortality, makes him a positive role model. He's not a hero in the sense of the word that we think of a hero now. He's definitely not a moral actor. Okay, so let me give you more context on why I say that. The book opens with a conflict between Achilles and Agamemnon. Agamemnon sacked a church, I believe it's the Church of Apollo, or Shrine to Apollo, and Apollo casts a pestilence on the Greeks until one of the priests asked Agamemnon, just give me back my daughter and the pestilence will end. Agamemnon says no. Later on, he finally gives in, but he gives the daughter up and demands Achilles' prize woman that he loves. So that causes Achilles to withdraw from the war. And Achilles withdrawing from the war costs the Greeks thousands and thousands and thousands of lives. Great, honorable warriors, men, brothers, fathers, sons, are dying at war. In a war they're destined to win, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but all because Achilles, his ego is hurt. And he asks his mom, who is a god, to ask Zeus to punish the Greeks. And this kind of falls into Zeus's plan in a way. That's why my general hypothesis about the book is it's not necessarily about the humans, the human flaws, and the human emotions, and human ego and stuff like that. It's more about the deterministic nature of God's will. Okay, so again, this is pre-Christian. So the Greek version of God, ultimate God, is Gaia, a woman, Earth, Mother Earth, Zeus's mother. And Gaia approaches Zeus one day, and she says, "Zeus, there are too many humans on the Earth. We need a war to wipe them out." And it was kind of up to Zeus to make that happen. So you can't really blame Achilles or Paris. His other name is Alexander, who takes Helen from Greece. That's another thing that a lot of people talk about the war starting because Helen is taken from Greece by Alexander or Paris. The funny thing about that particular instance is after Gaia makes the request, there's a party, and Aphrodite, Hera, and Athena are in a beauty contest, basically, where Alexander, Paris, is meant to decide who is the most beautiful of the three. And Zeus picks him to make this decision, which seems to be part of his plan to cause a war. Because Paris is a weak figure, to say the least, in the book. And he makes the weak choice. He chooses Aphrodite, who is the goddess of lust, sexual pleasure, fertility, as opposed to choosing the wisdom of Athena or the power of Hera. So, in a sense, it's a condemnation of lust. In this case, you can see a certain moral judgment being made against one particular virtue or vice, whatever you want to call it. So, Zeus does a very intelligent thing by starting this beauty pageant and making Paris the victim, in a sense, of his own weakness. Because if you have to start a war and you have to kill a lot of great people and you have to cause a lot of human suffering, you might as well sneak in a lesson about life, a moral. You might as well sneak in something that will be remembered when the story is told. Because, this story was spoken word of mouth to Greeks. It wasn't written down originally. It was recited. And for a book to be remembered word for word, especially for how long it is, it's hard to argue about the importance of these particular lessons that are being taught in a metaphoric way. Okay, so let's get into just some more bare facts about the book. So, Achilles retreats. War starts happening. There's duels. Menelaus, the guy who had his wife taken, challenges Paris to a duel. Menelaus wins the duel, but Paris is saved by Aphrodite, the one that he chose to be the most beautiful. There's another duel, and Zeus, even though this is all according to his plan, he says, let's let this duel happen, and one side is going to win, and let's call it a day. And Hera, she literally makes the argument like, we've come this far, we've done so much, why end it? Let's just finish. It's been 10 years. We don't want this to end without the conquest of Troy. So Zeus, even the god of gods, suffers from indecision, and it's up to the other gods to help push him along. to get the job done. Whether you think it's ultimately an evil act is another thing. But again, can you really disagree with the commandment from the ultimate god, the god above Zeus, Gaia? So the battle goes on back and forth, and every single person who dies gets a little bit of a backstory. Every single death is described in detail, and the character of the person who is dying is also described. That takes up a lot of the book. And the tragic thing is, at first it's a nuisance, but as the book goes on, it starts to sink in the extent of the tragedy that's taking place. Great men, undeniably great men, good men, wise, generous, virtuous, are getting destroyed in brutal, brutal ways. And their death, it's not even that their death, they go to heaven and they live peaceably in heaven. The concept of the soul in Greek metaphysics is a lesser version of yourself. When you go to Hades, you are yourself without the heart and lust for life. You are kind of just a wandering spirit with no animus, no life. So that's different from the Christian notion of a soul, which is you die and you go to heaven and you are the greatest version of yourself. When you die in Greek mythology, it's basically the eternal punishment no matter what. And the only redemption you have as a human is the glory you win in battle, because that is what's going to carry your name on, give your identity immortality, because it's not going to last in the underworld. That's another thing that's really awesome about this book is the emphasis on glory and dying in battle. And even though you have no real control over your life and no real understanding of what's actually going on, there's a line in the book that says a man's fate is the same whether he works hard or does nothing, which basically means you're going to die no matter what. Your fate is sealed. Are you going to die a warrior? Are you going to die with your friends in battle for a noble cause? Or are you going to die doing nothing? So either way, you're done. And on that note, there's actually a really interesting scene with Achilles when Achilles comes back into the battle. So, okay, Achilles is out for most of the book. Boom, boom, boom. People are dying. Gods are intervening, doing all this crazy stuff. Until finally his cousin dies in battle. His cousin puts on Achilles' armor to try and rally the Greeks for one final push to beat the Trojans, because the Trojans are pushing the Greeks all the way back to the ocean. They're at the boats. They're about to burn the boats, which means if they burn the Greek boats, then there's no way the Greeks are getting home and they're doomed. So there's a final push by Patroclus to trick the Trojans into thinking that Achilles has come back, and Hector ends up killing him. When Achilles finds out, that's what turns the tide in favor of the Greeks, because Achilles is like, oh, I'm done being angry. I'm done being angry. He goes up to Agamemnon and he's like, hey, I'm sorry. And Achilles goes up to Agamemnon and says, hey, I'm sorry. And Agamemnon says, hey, I'm sorry too, but really it wasn't my fault. Zeus tricked me. Zeus tricked me into being petty about the things, the values, the girls, and that's what caused this to happen. And in a sense, he's right. Because Zeus did trick him. They have, even though they're half immortal, Agamemnon and Achilles, they're descendants of gods, they still don't have complete control over what they're doing. So to blame this book on the pettiness of Agamemnon or the selfishness of Achilles is placing the blame in the wrong place. They are just pawns in a greater scheme that God has put into place, and they seem to be more like vessels that flesh out these things of pride and how pride can be um, misused, and how greed can be misused, and how selfishness can be misused. But they're not true. They're not organic. They don't organically come from the characters. If that makes any sense. Again, that's my opinion on it. Definitely subject to debate on that. So they finally join forces, and they're pushing all the Trojans back. Finally, okay, so the point I was going to say is Achilles goes on a killing spree. Literally, the literal definition is killing spree. It's cool. The Greeks do a lot of things like that that have remained in our culture. If you play video games, you know what a killing spree is. For their dead friends, they pour wine out onto the sand. I think that's funny. There's a line that says "eat your heart out." So that common phrase, "Oh, eat your heart out," comes from this book, or maybe maybe it's a common thing in Greek language that has carried over and remained alive. Okay, so Achilles finds in his bloodlust rage, he comes upon an unarmed guy. I think he was just farming, and he's just farming, and Achilles is all crazy, runs up to him, and the guy's like, "Hey, don't kill me. I'm not armed." And Achilles basically says to him, "Hey, you're gonna die. I'm gonna die. People better than you have died. People better than me are gonna die. I'm gonna we're all gonna die. So I'm just gonna kill you now and get it over with, basically." And the guy's like, "Oh, okay," and he kills him. But it drives the point home about how almost meaningless life is, and how glory and honor and respect are transcendent qualities. And the only thing we could ever do is pursue those qualities, and if it leads to our death, all the better. And that's actually, that kind of thought is definitely from the warrior school of thinking, and you see it in like Spartan culture, and even like Nietzsche. Nietzsche has that kind of mentality about life. So ultimately, the book is definitely worth reading. The book is definitely worth reading because it's more important. Okay, so an interesting thought I had about just ideas as I was reading the book is this. People tend to think, when it comes to what is controlling human action, the first interpretation of the book leads the reader to believe that people like Achilles and people like Agamemnon and the gods, Zeus, Poseidon, Hera, Aphrodite, are in control of us. People greater than us, people who have more power than us, are ultimately the deciders of our fate. Because the Greeks had no choice, the Trojans had no choice. Paris made one decision that caused all the Trojans to go to war. And Hector. Hector is actually the only good guy, kind of, in the book. He's the most noble hero. He's defending his family even though they're wrong. In a sense, just like Achilles and Agamemnon, he's just playing his role in Zeus's plan, but he does it honorably, and he doesn't flinch, even though he knows he's on the wrong side of the war. So there's something to be said about Hector. And this kind of reminds me of conspiracy theory type thinking. Because if you're a conspiracy theorist and you have an idea that we're all being controlled by some group of people who are much more powerful than us, you have to kind of be an atheist in a sense. Because if you believe in God, then how can these men and women be so powerful and so destructive and so controlling if a god existed, that kind of evil shouldn't be allowed to exist. Or if it does, or if there is a god and that evil does exist, then we're some kind of weird experiment where God is putting pressure on us for some reason that we're not aware of. But if you look at this book through a religious viewpoint, Gaia made a decision and everything stems from that. Gaia represents the earth. And the earth wants humans to die because there's too many of us. And the earth asks Zeus, which is a god that represents lightning, represents the clouds, abstract. He represents the king of all kings. It may be a stretch to assume, but maybe Zeus is the mind. Maybe the way we're controlled, just like the way the Greeks are controlled, is the earth's effect on our consciousness. If you think of the earth as God, and you think of how the earth can affect our mentality, how can we know that the earth? It's called Gaia Theory. This is a pre-existing theory, but it seems to have its roots in the Iliad. Imagine that the earth is a living organism, Gaia, and there's no detachment between our consciousness and the earth. So if the earth wants us to die, it communicates with our consciousness, and through our consciousness controls us to act, causing wars, causing diseases, causing ecological disasters. We think we're to blame. We think this person's to blame. We think this person's to blame. But it's really the consciousness of the earth that's controlling us. Obviously, totally fringe interpretation of the book. But it's the metaphysics that's being put forward by the book seem to me to be an extension of, or the creation of, Gaia Theory, which is why I say it's similar to the Bible, because there are heavy connotations of what's right and wrong and how you should do certain things and how we are powerless in the face of the powers that are above us, and we should sacrifice and we should worship and we should not argue with the powers above us, and because of all that, it creates a lot of structure for what it means to be a human and what it means to be a good person. So this is not just a book. This is not just a story about something that happened. It's not just a retelling of a historical event. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Probably not. It's a assertion of values. It's a critique of the human condition. It's an expression of the feudal nature of the individual will, and how we're destined, how we're ultimately doomed. We're mortals. We'll never be gods. We'll only can get a taste of what it means to be a god by living great lives, and that could even be cut short if your destiny is to be a pawn for someone greater than you. It's a very dark book, honestly. A hopeless book. Similar to the way the Old Testament is. And after I read the Odyssey, Iliad, the Odyssey, the next book I'm reading is the Old Testament. So all these theories I'm putting out there, we're going to see if they make sense. But that's my take on the Iliad. Thank you for watching, guys.